Hello guys, Reza again. Thank you very much for watching this one. In the previous video we talked about Autodesk 2016 extension to basics. In this one we're going to talk about new additions in modeling submenu. I've made some display layers ready to go to basically get the ball rolling, and I'm not gonna wait or spend time modeling anything. They're fairly simple primitives that I'm gonna go through. The first command we're gonna explore is Bevel. So I'm going to right click on that display layer, select objects, go to viewport, press F to frame, and then I'm gonna go to component mode, select all four edges. Now I can shift right click, bevel edge, go to the option box to bring the bevel options window. So you know from 2016 with fractional, which is perfect for thin objects, it prevents inside out bevels, which used to be pain in the neck back in the day. But for thick objects you still can use absolute, and now we have offset space set to world, or you can set that to local. Well, when you know that when absolute is selected, the width value, this one, is used without restrictions. So, and that's the difference between fractional and absolute. Um, with fractional, the bevel width won't be larger than the shortest edge, and that's why Maya is trying to prevent inside-out bevels for thin objects. With absolute, if you have a thick object, go with that. But what is the difference between world and local? If you have an object like this, and this is a scaled object, if I go and look at the channel box in scale X, 8 is the number, so I scale that in x-axis 8 units. So if you have a scaled object, the offset will ignore the scaling and use world space values to bevel. So let's say I'm gonna set this one to 0.5 segment. One segment will do just fine, and the rest I leave it by default. If I go and apply, this is something that I'll be getting. Alright, and that's quite normal. There is no difference between this and the area version of Maya Bevel. And I'm gonna undo that to get to the initial pose, that one. But if you set to local, and if it's a scale object, I'm gonna go and select the exact 4 edges again. If I set to local mode in offset space, and if you're beveling a scaled object like this one, the offset is also scaled relative to the scaling applied to the object. So if I go and select local, Maya looks at the channel box, finds that the number of 8, subtract it, and try to imagine the initial state of the object, and then performs bevel. That's why you're getting a more stretchy type of effect. Alright, so that's pretty much the difference that you might have in these two space modes. Now we have depth as well, which is quite interesting. If I go and select all 4 again, bring this one to 5, so we use more segments to have a bit of a curvature, and I'm gonna increase the width to something like 0.4 and apply bevel. And of course I don't want that to be set to local, so I'm gonna go and choose fractional actually. And this is the top result that we're getting. Alright, I'm gonna just very quickly operate that again. So I set that to world mode because I don't want Maya to look at my channel box and bevel it based on the local value. So now we'll be getting pretty nice curvature, and that's fantastic. It's kind of outward bevel, and that's all we had so far. But with the new addition, with extension 2, we can go and set the depth to -1 instead and get an inward bevel, and that is pretty nice. Something that you had to use probably Boolean in earlier versions to get, or probably extrusion, but it would used to be a time-consuming task. But now it's fairly neat, and the type of result that you'll be getting is quite nice. So I really like that attribute inside the new bevel tool. We also have mitering, and the deal with mitering is it's going to determine how, if I just move around here and bring this one, that would be a good example for mitering. How intersecting beveled edges are joined when one or more non-bevel edges is also involved. So let's say we have this and this and this selected. Alright, these three. But you may have noticed that these are all non-beveled edges, and these are the one that we want to bevel. If I set that mitering mode to auto, Maya will automatically look for a nice bevel, and it's going to create that bevel for us. So as you can see, this little guy here is an n-gon, but we have some sort of a structure going on here with 5 segments. Not too bad, but with this window now I can flick through different modes and explore the rest. It's a little bit easier to just watch the way they perform rather than explaining it. So if I go to uniform, it creates pretty much a single vertex to change that n-gon to a quad, which is kinda nice. We always aim quad, and the fact that we're getting a quad now, it gives us a better topology. If I switch to patch, now it creates a very smooth result. So we have quad here, we have 2 n-gons there, but the result is actually quite smooth. And sometimes this is something that you may want. Similar to patch is radial. If I go and switch to radial, it produces an arc here. That's the only difference. And of course, you set to none. You won't be getting any mitering. It's just a normal result that you might get without mitering. And we've got mitering along, which determines the direction that corner vertices move when mitering is set to anything but none. So if I set this one, let's say, to uniform, which in this case works best, I can go align it to the center. I can go up from here, actually align it to the center, align it to the edge, so it's tightening the edge, or hard edges, which in this case is just drawing the object. So I'm gonna go and switch it to auto, and usually auto would be a good case, would be a good option. Maya is gonna figure that out and gives you the best result possible. So that's bevel, pretty much how you use the new bevel tool, and it's quite exciting. Let's move to the next one, which is bridge. So if I select this object here, there's a very minor change in this new tool. If I were to go ahead and select these two, as we know, bevel, bridge, right click on it, bridge option box, you can see that if I select to set this to smooth and smooth path, I get to have twist taper. But if I set that one to linear, I don't have access to any of these. The new addition to a bridge is direction, automatic, and custom. If I just click and set apply, This is the normal bridge you used to get, but if I change the direction from source to target, we might get a slight twist. So if I go and select the object, and I'm gonna in fact undo to show you how it works. I'm gonna undo one more time, and let's apply that. Now look, if I set this one to minus, we instantly gonna get a little bit of twist, which is kinda nice. Apart from that, it's business as usual, and you'll be getting all the same tools and options you used to get in the earlier version. Quickly moving to the next one, which is mirror and flip. I'm going to talk about mirror first. So let's say we have an object. We want to get rid of half of it, make some changes, and mirror it to the other side. Mirror now is located here, and it's replacing mirror cut and mirror geometry. So Maya is combining two commands into one and places it inside this mirror subsection. If I go to the orthographic view, so probably front would be a good one, face, and I'm going to carefully select one half. Try not to select the other half, obviously. So control to deselect. I'm gonna just quickly double check that. Yes, that is in fact correct. If I press delete, okay, this is the problem. So now if I mirror, we have a kind of a hole in here, and we have to go manually move them, these vertices, closer to each other and manually merge component them. But now in the new edition, it's quite smart actually. It's going to detect these holes and it's going to get rid of it. So if I go to mesh, mirror, by default, if I just set to the world from X to Y, plus to minus, everything is all set. If I go and apply and mirror, this is something that I would be getting in the earlier version. Now I'm still getting it now, but look at that. With merge borders vertices, problem solved. You can even, if you I've already UV mapped it, but if you don't have UV map, you can actually bridge borders and have a geometry within that hole and basically fix that this way, and then UV map it, not to affect the textures. For me, merge border edges works perfectly fine with no problem. So that's pretty neat. This is something that you may want to use whenever you want to mirror one object from one side to another. With flip, if I go to perspective very quickly, we have this character. We worked with this character in the previous session, and you may have noticed it's not symmetrical. This object has got a different type of hand or arm pose compared to this side. So what if I want to copy the pose from plus to minus? I wish I had that a magic button I could press, and basically Maya looks at the left hand side, copies it to the right hand side. Well, the great news is we do have that button now, and that is inside Edit Mesh, Symmetrize. How does it work? So you select the components you want to mirror, and then you go and run the tool. It's not gonna do anything. To begin with, it looks for the axis for mirroring, and that is really, really important. Mirror axis position has to be set, and that is exactly right at the center. If I click once, look what happens. Maya looks at the positive side, copies the pose to the negative side, which is pretty neat. I'm gonna undo now to talk about the other command, which is flip. So flip is going to reposition the selected geometry across the mirror axis. So very similar to multiplying object and set the scale attribute by -1. It's kind of similar to that. So let's say if I were to select this one again, right, and if I go to flip, select the mirror axis, it's gonna flip the effect. That's pretty much what this command does. Fairly new. It can be a time saver if you have a scenario that you can apply this to that. Um, and pretty neat. Next one is Conform, aka shrink wrap. We no longer have shrink wrap in Toolkit, Maya Toolkit, um, and the terminology has changed, but the functionality is pretty much the same. So conform wraps the vertices onto another object or onto another surface, um, and the way that it works, it's actually fairly easy. You have to have two objects. You have to make the target object live surface. I assume you all are solid Maya users. You should know how to turn an object into a live object. If you don't, you select the object, you just click on that magnet icon. Now the object is live. Select the other object, and if you go to mesh, you can find conform there. You have two types and they work fairly similarly. It looks at the closest points. Basically, by default, each vertex of the wrapper, the top one, um, snaps to the closest point on the target mesh. So if I go apply, it applies itself into the target mesh, and if you look at the shape, it conforms it into the target shape, which is pretty neat. Along normals is going to look at the direction of the normals. You have to make sure you don't have any flipped or reverse normals. If you have to go to display mesh, and ironically the name of this one is conform as well. You have to run that to fix your model and then come back and apply conform inside mesh conform. Okay, so that's that. Fairly simple. Moving to the next one, and which is wrap tool. If I have one object and I want to animate it along a curve, I used to have basically turn this into a path and create a path motion. Now in this edition, inside modeling menu set, all you need to do is just to select your font, select your path, and go to deform and curve wrap, and that's pretty much done. You can change the envelope to turn it on and off in the attribute editor. You can play around with the offset, which is pretty nice. Okay, and if you right click on it, you can set key so it's keyable. Alright, and you can have any objects. You can have a vehicle here. You can have actually a circle instead of this curve, a sinus curve, and kind of animate the font around that circle, something like motion graphics you might be interested in. You can kind of have some squash and stretch, and again animate it and create some sort of an interesting effect. You can actually squash and stretch it in y-axis as well if you want. You have additional options you can go through. I'm not gonna spend time talking about this because they're really basic. You can just spend 10 minutes and basically master that tool. But that's actually pretty interesting. Make sure to check that out. It's pretty cool, very useful, and it's one of those things that you can use to create a very nice, interesting effect. Now, next tool is Symmetrized UV tool. I've got a low poly head model here, nothing special. And if I go to UV texture editor to look at its shell, it's not a bad UV, it's not too bad. We don't have severe overlapping points, but it's not symmetrical. And that's going to make the process really difficult for us. We have a new tool here. If I hover my mouse, look at the tooltip, Symmetrize UV tool. Also, if I go to tool, you can find that here. So the way that it works is you right click on it, you select the region that you want to match, then you have to think about the axis, UV axis, and that's going to help Maya to differentiate positive from negative, and that's going to help the process, basically defining the origin for Maya in UV 0 to 1 coordinates. So I'm gonna this is my axis, alright, and it's aligned with this line at the center. So if I click on it, and I'm gonna select that, if I run the command and click on it, you can see Maya is now defining the axis at the center. Now look at that, now I'm getting a brush. Maya looks at the right hand side and matches left hand side to the right hand side. So all I need to do is just to hold the left mouse button and drag. And look at that, everything is fixed now. So that's as easy as it gets, and in a few seconds you can come up with a pretty neat symmetrical UV shell for your model, which is pretty neat. So that's that one. We've got two more to talk about in polygons. First one is text, and the second one is SVG, and we're gonna wrap up this video and move on to the next one. So instead of text, now we have something called type. If I click, Maya is going to load fonts, Windows or Mac fonts, and now we have a very neat user interface to work with. So if I go to type, I can go and press F actually in the scene, and we can type down Autodesk Maya. Alright, if I go to the outliner, you can see I have type mesh font. There we have it. You can actually type down my name and or any name. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my name now because it's like an enjoyable thing for me to see my name on the screen, so I'm gonna just move that one to the side, and that's as easy as it gets. I mean, it's pretty easy to change the font type, to change the font style, to change the alignment. You can take care of tracking or scale, or if I have multiple words like that, I can adjust spacing between fonts as well. There's not much to it, to be honest with you. You can go to texturing and click on that separate shaders. Now you have separate shaders for caps, separate shaders for bevel, and separate shaders for extrude. So if I go and click on this button here, I can change that blue color for extrusion to something like yellow, and if I go and switch this one to red, we don't have that in our font, any bevel shader, but the main font I can change it to something like brown. So I'm gonna go here, change something to brown, something like that. You can be very quick with your font. It's very easy to use, it's very simple. You can animate that however you want. You can set key, set the pivot, and come up with interesting results. You can create extrusion thickness and specify a curve for your extrusion thickness. We're not going to spend too much time on this. Obviously, this is a fairly straightforward process. I'm pretty sure if you spend few um, minutes even on it, you can get the hang of the tool and move on to the next one. I thought I would just mention that. It's pretty nice, and that's a replacement for the old text. The other one is SVG. If I click on it, you see a placeholder. Okay, and then you have to go to import, click on the import, and I don't know, bring something, and that's a vector object. It's not going to import the shaders. You have to go and manually change its shaders however you want. If I go to SVG tab, I can offset the position of some of these objects, so you can see I can very um, quickly change the Z depth or Z offset of some of these objects, which is pretty neat. Give it a bit of a depth, and of course you have to go and assign a new material to whatever color you want. But it's a pretty straightforward process. I'm pretty sure if you go through it, you'll find more about that. Sometimes the normal is reversed. You have to go back and change its normals. In this case, it was fine. But many cases you have to go and reverse the normal. If you find yourself in a situation that you don't see your shaders anymore, you go and reverse normals. And that's pretty much the end of it for the modeling session. I hope you guys have learned something new in this video. For the next video, we move on to the next module and explore more about new additions in my 2016 extension 2. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon.